Greetings, everyone. I'm going to be sharing with you an interview that I did with Robert Temple about his recently published book, A New Science of Heaven. I highly recommend this book in that Robert does an extraordinary job of reviewing the history of the studies of plasma and exploring the implications of this science, these scientific discoveries, and how they reshape our understanding of the universe and of ourselves. Plasma is known as the fourth state of matter, the other three being solids, liquids, and gases. But it's extraordinary to think that plasma scientists are now realizing that over 99% of our universe consists of plasma. So in this interview, Robert will give you an overview of the scientific understanding of plasma and also some of his personal sense of the implications of that in terms of our understandings of ourselves and our world. While he and I don't always agree on some of those personal views and implications of the science, his research is extraordinary. He is a brilliant researcher and an innovative, independent thinker, and I highly respect him and his work. So enjoy the interview. So greetings, everyone. I am thrilled and honored today to be interviewing Robert Temple and discussing his new book, which is A New Science of Heaven, which is an extraordinary book. But before we dive into that, let me give a brief bio of Robert, and I will include a more full bio below the video, and then we'll launch into our discussion. But thank you for being here today.
Well, it's tremendous to be talking to you, Heather, because you're a wonderful presence on the podcast screen world. The fact is, you're learned, you're sensible, you're inspired, and it's an honor to be talking to you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Thank you. Well, let me just give a little bit of background here. So, Professor Robert Temple is the author of a dozen books, including the international bestseller, The Sirius Mystery, which is extraordinary. His books have been translated into 44 different languages. He combines academic scholarship with an ability to communicate this information in a way that's accessible to the public. He's a visiting professor of history and philosophy of science in a university in Beijing and has also been a visiting professor in an American university. He's a fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society and has been a member of the Egypt Exploration Society since the 70s. And you've done so much more. I mean, as we were just talking about before we started the recording, you're truly a brilliant researcher and a Renaissance man. And the level of your exploration and deep dive into different areas, and then your capacity to communicate it in a way that's accessible to the public is truly amazing. And this book, A New Science of Heaven, is extraordinary in that if we take in the information that you're sharing in that book, it transforms our understanding of the universe and of ourselves. So it's really an amazing book.
I guess it's all my fault. I'm always upsetting apple carts.
But it's extraordinary. And let's dive in with, if you could give a brief explanation of plasma and how extraordinary it is that we're now realizing that 99% of the universe is composed of plasma.
Well, that's right. And I'm sure it will surprise anyone who doesn't know, which is just about everybody, including most scientists, actually. Astronomers and astrophysicists do know by now, although they don't necessarily say so, that the universe is not made of atoms. This is a big shock because we all grew up believing what we were told. I long ago gave up believing what I'm told, but we're all trusting souls. And when our teachers said in good faith, because they thought it was true, that the universe is made of atoms, well, so that made sense, didn't it? But I'm afraid it's not true. 99.9% at least of the universe is not made of atoms. So what does this mean? Well, okay, what is it made of then? It's made of plasma, but what is plasma? So I'll be as simple as I can. Plasma is basically particles, atomic particles, and incomplete atoms known as ions, but not complete atoms. And different laws of physics apply to plasma than apply to atoms. So the physics that we have on our planet Earth, that we learn at school and in university, and all the people who get their PhDs in it and so on, they're dealing with Earth physics. They're not dealing with cosmic physics. And the fact that everything's made of plasma and that small rocky planets like ours are made of atoms, which are sort of on the fringes of things, means that everything that's of real importance, apart from the things in our daily lives where we're all made of atoms, everything that's really important is a plasmic phenomenon. Now, this, and I can explain how and why as we go along, means that we are plasma beings, now known as bioplasma, and that our physical bodies are temporary vehicles. I call them smart overcoats.
I love that term in the book.
Well, they do wear out, unfortunately, as we all discover as we get older. And those aches and pains that you feel, that's the smart overcoat coming to the end of its term. And so it gets to the point where we simply have to leave them. The thing to remember is that physical death is absolutely not extinction at death. So the good news and the bad news is like this. The good news is that nobody dies. Nobody wants to die, do they? We think. In fact, there are people who do want to extinguish themselves because they hate themselves so much. But that's a minority. So the good news is that nobody dies. Yippee! But the bad news is that nobody dies. Just think about what that means.
Yeah.
It means that you're stuck with yourself forever. If you're a bad person, you're going to be in bad company because you're going to be faced with yourself. So the only thing you can do to have a better experience in what we could call the afterlife, which is when we go back to the plasma world, which is parallel with our own physical one. It's just that we can't see it with our optic nerves. Sensitive people can sense it. Is to become better people. If you become a good person, then you'll be in the company of somebody nice and pleasant when you die on Earth, because you can actually live with yourself and you'll be with other people of your own standard of goodness. So you'll have a really nice time. But if you're a horrid person, you won't. It's going to be awful.
So we return to that plasma field, but we retain that individual consciousness that we then can work with and work on our own evolution across many incarnations into the physical form.
And the incarnations into physical form are to help us learn and grow.
Yeah.
And improve. In other words, to evolve into better people. And really, fame and riches and all that is complete nonsense and means nothing. The only thing that means anything, and you can be as intelligent as you like, and you can still be a bad person, that's no good. The only thing that matters is, are you good? Are you kind? Are you unselfish? Do you help others? And do you have compassion for all living things? And only if we develop those qualities can we really grow and go into the higher levels of being.
So it's really about coming from the heart.
Yes.
And describe more in depth how it's amazing to, maybe we could talk about the Kordylewski clouds and how they hold that consciousness around the earth, and that they contain it's extraordinary when you talk about how they contain the memories of everything that's occurred on the Earth.
Yes.
And I'm
Well,
wondering if you see them as similar to what we describe as the Akashic records.
yes. Oh, yes, definitely. So let me explain what the Kordylewski clouds are, because most people won't have heard of them. Um, the um, the clouds they don't emit any light, and they're pretty much transparent. So they were discovered in 1961 by a Polish fellow named Kordylewski. Hence, they're the Kordylewski clouds, because they're named after their discoverer. He wanted to study them more, but his great-grandson has told me that the Polish government, with whom he didn't get along, that was the Polish communist government of 1961, stopped his research because they didn't like it. So everything was in abeyance, and so people tried to confirm the existence of these clouds, which are so difficult to detect, but they lacked the sensitive instruments of today. So in 2019, because I'm on researchgate.net, which is where a lot of my technical papers can be found, I discovered that some Hungarian observational astronomers had confirmed the existence of the Kordylewski clouds, which had been sort of hanging in the balance since 1961. Nobody was quite sure. Was it Kordylewski's fantasy? Was he mad? You know, all this kind of thing. And so we now know that they really are there, and using better instruments, and also they got lucky. So as soon as I knew that, I knew what it meant to have these clouds, which I'll explain in a moment. But I contacted the woman astronomer who was the head of the team in Hungary through ResearchGate, because you can send a message to another person on the website. And I said, this is wonderful that you've confirmed these clouds. Are you studying the plasma aspects of them? And she replied saying, we are only studying celestial mechanics aspects. And she didn't appear to even know what I meant by the plasma aspects of the clouds. I don't think that she knew very much about plasma, or she didn't appear to. And so then I immediately contacted my friend Chandra Vikramasinghe, who's a retired professor of astrophysics. And I said, Chandra, who had not heard of these clouds, by the way, there are these two big clouds. I told him about them. They've been verified, and we need to go into print with a paper about their plasma aspects, which would mean that they would have intelligence, and I'll explain that in a moment.
Yeah.
So we published this paper in Advances in Astrophysics in 2019, and then and so because Chandra, you know, he started out as a professor of mathematics. He's a genius and he can do all the equations standing on his head blindfolded. So we did all that as well, because everything has to be done in that way. And I'm not someone who has a lot of patience for equations, but that's another story. And so then I thought, I've got to really explain all of this. And I'd been researching the plasma for a long time. And so here's how these clouds can be intelligent, and how big they are and where they are. They are between the Earth and the Moon, but not in a direct line of sight. They're 60 degrees to the right and 60 degrees to the left as you look at the Moon. And they're at points known as the Lagrange points, or he was really an Italian called Lagrange. He's often, the French call him Lagrange, and we in English call him Lagrange. And it's after him that these points are named, which are the 2 points between the Earth and the Moon, where the gravitational pull of each is negligible. It comes to zero because they balance each other out. The Moon can't pull you towards it, and Earth can't pull you towards it. There are these 2 points, and they're often just known as L points. L4 and L5, as a matter of fact. The other numbers are to do with the sun. So these clouds, each of them is 9 times the size of the Earth. So the 2 clouds together are 18 times the size of the Earth. And they're between us and the Moon. So the first thing that is obvious is that the Earth-Moon system is not an Earth-Moon system. It's a two-cloud system with an Earth and a moon thrown in. We've got to realize this. You see, we're far too ethnocentric, Earth-centric. We still think in pre-Copernican terms that the Earth really is the center of the universe. And you get crazy scientists saying, oh, we're alone in the universe. I think we're alone in the universe. There can't be anybody else out there. Well, of course, those are all people who are in asylums. The idea that the universe doesn't have any other intelligence in it, and that anybody pretending to be in their right mind can even speculate that that's possible, it just astounds me. But never mind, the world is full of lunatics.
But it's also reflective of how we're so focused on visible matter as really what's primary in terms of our scientific exploration, whereas part of what you're really reframing is how much this intelligence and life in the universe is this inorganic plasma.
You're absolutely right. Absolutely right, Heather. Well, you've grasped the whole thing, fortunately. And in fact, most people who read the book do say that they understand it all, although they find the information is a bit overwhelming and they have to read it a second time. And there's an audio book, and they often listen to that then as well. But the clouds are so gigantic, together 18 times the size of our planet, and they are made of plasma. Now, they are made of a very special type of plasma, the only kind of plasma that is really worth its salt. And that is dusty plasma. The plasma has to have dust, or it's not worth bothering with. And it's also known as a complex plasma. Dusty complex plasmas are a species of their own, but it's only the plasma physicists who even know about them. Ask any ordinary physicist and he'll say, what's a dusty complex plasma? I know what plasma is. And he'll give you the old 1950s incorrect definition of a plasma as a charged cloud of gas where the positive and negative charges are balanced. Well, nothing could be more ridiculous, because dusty complex plasmas are never balanced. It's impossible for them to be balanced. And they contain modules within themselves, which are called plasmoids, which were discovered in the 1950s by that brilliant man, Winston Bostick. What a hero. And they are surrounded by sheaths. Sheaths are sort of double layer things, just like the membranes that surround cells, but made of different things, that protect these little subdivisions inside a giant plasma, so that you can have a very cold interior next to another plasmoid with a very hot interior right next to it, but surrounded by their sheaths, they can't affect one another. And so you can have the most immensely complicated interior structure to these dusty complex plasmas. All the dust particles are charged. Now, the charges are vast, because a single dust particle can have 10,000 electrons clinging onto it, just one dust particle. Well, imagine a cloud containing dust particles, two of them 18 times the size of the Earth, and what the fantastic electromagnetic forces are, and the positive charges and the negative charges, and the superconductivity of all the electric currents. And it's now been established by the most advanced researchers, and I report this in the book, that any body, and that includes our physical bodies as examples, any plasma body, say the size of our physical body, will have a more complex interior structure than our physical bodies themselves do. That's how complex our bioplasma bodies are, which are slightly larger than our physical bodies. And it's around our heads. Some people see the auras, and very sensitive people can detect that sort of thing. I've never seen an aura myself. But the whole thing that's going on, it's all plasma phenomena. Now, it was the Russian plasma physicist Sitovich and his colleagues, Gregor Morfil and all the other chaps, Vladimir Mirov and so on, a lot of them being Russians, either in Russia as Sitovich was, or having moved to Germany or America, as a lot of them did. They were a little bit more freewheeling in their physics because they came from Russia and they weren't all tied up in the religious sanctity of conventional opinions in the West. Mm. That's just my speculation, that's why they were able to go so far with their plasma research. And so they have worked out and demonstrated in the lab that dusty complex plasma can spontaneously self-organize. And this was even stated in the mid-50s by Bostic with his plasmoids. They can self-organize spontaneously, and through a process using that buzzword of today, emergence. By emergence, they could develop intelligence. Now, we're talking about an AI type of intelligence. We don't know whether such entities could have feelings or emotions. This is unknown. But they would have fantastic computing power. These clouds, 18 times the size of the Earth, would have computing power trillions of trillions of trillions of trillions of trillions of times more than we can imagine. And, you know, all those computers in Utah where the security agencies are always recording all of your emails and your phone conversations and your text messages and all those wonderfully informative text messages such as "see you in 5 minutes," of which there are billions, and they've got them all stored, and good luck to them.
In the cloud, which is a very different notion than this phenomenal version of the clouds that really contain all of this memory and intelligence.
You see, the security agencies are so stupid because they think that they've got everything. But in fact, they've got less than 1% of everything. Where everything is, everything, I'm sure, the whole history of the planet, the whole history of the life of every person who's ever lived is in the Kordylewski clouds. Now, here is such a strange thing. Because you see, I also do a lot of research into ancient stuff, as you know. And one of my favorite subjects of research, and there is actually one chapter in the book about this, is to do with the Gnostic religions and mystery religions.
Yes.
And so there was a sect of the Gnostics known as the Marcosians. Very little survives about them, except in the heresiologists like Epiphanius, because unfortunately there were no Marcosian texts recovered at Nag Hammadi, where so many things were found in a jar that you know about, like lost gospels. And so, but we do know enough to know that the Marcosians believed that there were two gigantic superhuman entities above the atmosphere between the Earth and the Moon of immense size, and that they were super entities, and that we know the name that they used for one of them, which was Metatron. Now, the name Metatron is known elsewhere because it was a name used by the Samaritans, who were a sect of Judaism up in the north, who didn't get on with the Jerusalem Jews at all, and they were hostile to each other. But they speak of Metatron, and they say that the angel of the Lord, described in the Bible as the voice that came from the burning bush to Moses up on the mountaintop, was Metatron's voice. That it was Metatron, the angel of the Lord. It wasn't the Lord who was in the bush, it was the angel of the Lord. And the Samaritans named the angel of the Lord, who in the Bible isn't given a name. But the Samaritans said his name was Metatron. But the Marcosians say that Metatron is a giant entity between the Earth and the Moon. Well, figure that one out. So we have to realize that in ancient times, people were really into psychic perceptions, and they had shamans and seers and sibyls and priestesses and people going into trance and communing with the higher entities and all this kind of things.
More right brain ways of knowing.
And so they knew a lot of the stuff that we're only discovering with our modern science now in 2023.
Extraordinary. So are you saying then that these angelic beings, they're plasmoids that may be emissaries from these giant clouds?
Yes, well, I think that a lot of these glowing lights in the sky, which are often called UFOs, I mean, the particular ones that do funny movements that would kill anyone inside, because of the G forces, and the glowing balls, which resemble ball lightning, and ball lightning itself. I believe that they are plasmic drones that are basically scouting the Earth to keep the Kordylewski clouds informed. They've got thousands of them all over the place, and some of them are invisible. But we already know that ball lightning can pass through solid walls. There's a lot of information in print about ball lightning now, and I have a chapter about ball lightning called "Great Balls of Fire." But
it's a great chapter.
well, I don't go into all the details because there's so much already in print, and I give people the names of all the books to find out more. But I do reveal a few new things, and I suggest that a lot of UFO sightings are plasmoids, but because they often show intelligent behavior. For instance, there are descriptions of ball lightning looking at a Persian carpet and following the design and seeming to study it. Well, now, it's perceiving it, isn't it? So it's a plasmic drone. And who would be operating such a drone? It's got to be the Kordylewski clouds, I reckon. Who else is there to do that, to have thousands of plasmic drones? And sorry, go ahead.
So would you say then that the clouds not only are intelligent and have this phenomenal memory bank, but are conscious?
Oh, yes, definitely. Of course. They would be conscious, at least in an AI manner. As I said a moment ago, we don't know whether they would have emotions and feelings, but they would be super intelligent. They would be so intelligent that they would know more than probably everybody on Earth put together if you combined all their intelligence. They would, you see, we all know quite a lot of things, but they would know all of that plus. It's the ultimate value-added form of intelligence, because they know who everybody is. They will be watching this, for instance, because they monitor everything. They've got to, and they have the capacity to do that easily. So they would be monitoring everything, and they would have fantastic filtering and sorting systems, and way beyond the keyword thing that the spy agencies use, to say, oh, we better record this conversation and red flag it because somebody mentioned bomb. That's ridiculous. But the systems of sorting out what's really interesting and needs urgent attention will be perfected by the Kordylewski clouds, because they're probably billions of years old. They know the entire history of this planet. They know the details of every animal, not just every person who's ever lived, and probably every plant, and the entire geology of the planet. They will have witnessed its formation, the seas going up, the seas going down, the continents rising, the mountains going up, the mountains wearing down. They know the whole story of the Earth, and the Earth is what they're monitoring. Now, so because we're always in such a mess, and we're a genocidal species and a psychopathic species, because we spend all our time killing each other pointlessly, frankly, and we're obsessed with greed and silly things like fame. What does fame mean? It means nothing. And all these people who are super rich, and they become obsessed by making more money. I mean, if you've got a few $100 million, why continue to earn money? So it's a mess. But the reason why the clouds obviously don't intervene to save us from these catastrophes which we continually inflict upon ourselves, like the First World War, is because we are an experiment. And if you interfere with an experiment, it ceases to be an experiment.
So they're just monitoring us.
They can't interfere, because if the day comes when they interfere, the experiment is terminated. That's it. And so if things get to the absolute total crisis point, I guess they would have to intervene, because there'd be no point in having an experiment anymore then, if like billions of people died and everything was really coming to an end. I presume they would intervene at that stage. And don't forget, there's billions of people die. That doesn't mean they cease to exist. You're still left with billions of bioplasma beings. And what are you going to do with them? Where do they go? And that brings us to the whole question of the other world. There is another world, and where we go when we leave our smart overcoats, and we stay there until we return. Not everybody has to return. You can graduate, and but there are some people who, having graduated, choose not to go up into the more blissful regions, but they say, that's not for me. It's too boring. I'm going to keep working to try to help get that planet sorted. Now, as an individual bioplasma being, you can do that because you're not one of the clouds, you see. And if you take your own decision that you're going to come back anyway and go through all this aggro that we have here, where everybody tries to stop you doing everything, don't they? I mean, everything is an obstruction. Try and do anything good on this planet, and somebody's bound to complain. And so,
but it's a realm for transformation, you're saying.
Yes, you see, also we are using this difficult world to grow. Those of us who are prepared to become good and better and better and better people are only able to do it here, because I say that in the plasma world you can't, because you're static then, stuck in your level. I think that when people leave the Earth, it's like they have a barcode, which is a readout of who they are and how good they are. It's like a frequency. The higher frequencies are the better people, and you go straight to your level that matches that precise frequency automatically. So nobody's judged and before a tribunal and all that kind of thing. You automatically go to the level of your readout. How could they handle billions of people otherwise? So the whole thing, it must be supervised by the clouds somehow, and so they've got this system, which is to a large extent automated. So if you help another little old lady across the road, and if you give another dollar to a beggar, and if you help an injured dog, you might increase your frequency and go to a slightly higher level. You know, it's that simple. All you have to do is be good.
But then to be on your own path of growth and evolution, you have to come back into this density in order to be working through more of your process.
Yes, and that's dangerous because you could slip. I mean, a lot of people, I'm sure that there are pretty highly evolved entities who have fallen, hence the fallen angel motif.
In the Gnostic Gospels too, yeah.
Yes. And a typical example of one known to everyone is, in my opinion, is Napoleon. He was a very brilliant person who I think was a very highly evolved entity who fell. And look, he tried to conquer Europe, and guess what? 16 million people died because of his vanity. That's what I call a fallen person. You see? And now we've got one in Russia. And they're just they keep popping up everywhere. Megalomaniacs. So you can be doing very well, come back here to do even better, and you can suddenly be tempted by fleshly things. You know, you can suddenly decide, well, if I'm so clever, I want to become a billionaire, and I'm going to do it, and I don't care who gets hurt. Well, then you're going down, down, down.
Yes. And talk some about the cosmic web, because I think that's extraordinary to think about the way in which information can be transferred throughout the universe by these webs of plasma.
Yes, the cosmic web is now recognized by astronomers because they can see it. It looks like a spider's web. And in my book, I show that side by side with the structure of the human brain, which looks the same. And basically, it's an intelligent universe. The whole universe is conscious. And the stars are entirely, and our sun included, are entirely made of plasma. And I believe they're all alive. And so they're connected by these filaments. And so the electric universe theory comes in here about how the stars operate, but that's another subject that would require a separate conversation, really. But yes, the filaments linking the nodes, because the stars are the nodes of these vast plasmic constructions of the galaxies and so on. They are well, they constitute what is actually a web. And then these vast clouds that you see with the new telescopes, which are glowing, those are huge plasma clouds, and they're giving birth within them to stars. And these stars are nodes of a vast superconducting electric grid, which we call the cosmic web. And the observational astronomers tend to not know anything about plasma, really. And so they don't realize that when they see these things, they're looking at plasma stuff because they don't know what plasma really is or how it works. Because science is too fragmented. It's too fragmented. And nobody knows what the guy in the next lab down the corridor is doing. And even
but also one of the things that you said in the book that I just thought was so important and actually chilling is how much scientific research gets controlled by governments and by the military. So that scientists don't have easy access to what other scientists are doing, or the public does not either.
Well, that's right. I first discovered this, back in 1989. I published a book about hypnosis and consciousness called Open to Suggestion. It was actually banned in the United States by a certain organization. You can guess its initials. I was told this by the 8 publishers who wrote aggrieved letters to my agent saying these 2 men had come to see them and said, "Don't you dare publish this book by Robert Temple, because we're trying to shut the bastard up. We don't want this book coming out." So this has been going on against me since the 70s. So I'm used to it. I don't even mind it. But the thing is that the military, they can justify to a considerable extent their control of a lot of this technology because they can say it's for national security, and in many cases it is actually for national security. That's the unfortunate part about it, is that a lot of their excuses are actually true. I wish they weren't, but they overclassify everything just to be on the safe side, and also because they're paranoid, and also because a lot of them are control freaks, which is and I'm afraid the number of psychotics and control freaks in those agencies is rather vast. Now, they are very, very highly advanced in their scientific research in certain areas, including plasma. And for instance, you wouldn't know unless I told you that if you want to have a hydrogen bomb and you want to trigger it, you use something called a Z pinch, or in America, a Z pinch, which is a plasma phenomena, as the trigger to detonate your hydrogen bomb. I mean, the public don't know and wouldn't even necessarily want to know such details. But you see, if you're doing that, you've got to keep that secret, because you don't want the other guys in the other country who are enemies to know that. And this applies to all kinds of weapon systems, many of which the public knows absolutely nothing about and couldn't even suspect the existence of. And it gets pretty complicated. And then what with the overclassification, you see, they're very slow to declassify things that are maybe 30, 40, 50 years old. And I wanted to get a declassified document at one time, a report written by, I think, one of the guys mentioned in my book. I can't remember which one it was at the moment. Oh yes, he was a Greek chap who was advising the Americans, called Adamansky, I mean. And you wouldn't have heard of him. And so it was declassified. But then I wrote to Washington to get a copy of this, because it'd been declassified, I'm supposed to have access to it. And they said, yes, it's declassified, but the only way that you can see it is if you come to our office, which is near a certain big city, and you come in and you're searched and things, and you're not allowed to take notes. You can see it. You can't take any notes. You can't take any photographs. You can't have a copy. You can read it. There will be somebody standing beside you while you read it, and then you can leave. Now we're talking about, I think it was just a 12-page document that was relatively harmless because I already knew the gist of it because I'd read the précis or the summary. Mm-hmm. And so this is a relatively harmless document. And the idea that it should be so secret that you have to go into a locked room with an armed guard and all this, even to see it, and it's pointless. It's basically paranoia run amok. And so this is holding science back because the people who are trying to do the science in an open manner don't have any access to the secret stuff. Now, when I wrote this book, Open to Suggestion, I became very friendly with a wonderful man called Professor Jack Hilgard. He's really Ernest Hilgard, but he was called Jack, at Stanford. He was already in his 80s by the time I got friendly with him, and he had been a former president of the American Psychological Association. He was a very wonderful person, as well as a brilliant man, and he ran the chief hypnosis lab in America, which was then closed down because they don't want hypnosis labs in America anymore. And I said to him, Jack, because I was writing this book, and they all knew that I was writing this book, all the hypnotists. And I would go to the international conferences with them and that sort of thing, and knew them all. And he was especially friendly. And he said, I said, I was having trouble getting information about certain types of experiments, which they couldn't locate. I knew they'd been done, but I couldn't find the reports. He said, well, Robert, I have to tell you that it's very difficult to do a proper survey of hypnosis research, much less the history of it, because more than 50% of all the hypnosis experiments carried out in the United States of America have been done secretly by the FBI and associated agencies, and they're kept secret, and you can't have access to them unless you're in that world. I think he'd seen some because he was quite a high-ranking person. Everybody went to him for his advice, and he was a great patriot, you see. So he wouldn't have been disturbed by the fact that this stuff's all secret because he was a passionately patriotic American. The older guys like that were, and ever since the World War, they'd been working with the different branches of secret research in the interests of their country, and their motives were not to keep things secret just because they were control freaks. They weren't, but they were doing this to help their country. Unfortunately, this has all gone too far. This is much too much is kept secret, which needn't be kept secret, and the people who are keeping it secret are cutting their own throats, because you see, if they could put more out into the public domain, they'd get more feedback, which would then be useful for their secret stuff.
Well, and part of what I think is extraordinary about your book is it's partly because you know so many of these key scientists that have been studying plasma, but your capacity to access information, to synthesize what you synthesized, I think is extraordinary, in that so much is kept in these research silos, or it's hard to get access to it. So that's part of what's really powerful about the book is how you've managed to pull together that research and synthesize it. But I'm curious why you think they were trying to block your other book. What would have been the reason to?
Oh, because I had a section in it that was about mind control and how you can program an assassin, sort of Manchurian Candidate type stuff, which is now much more widely known, but very little was known at that stage. And they didn't want the public to even know such things were possible. So they put out disinformation that these things are impossible. Well, that's nonsense, because hypnosis in unscrupulous hands, with the 5% of hypersusceptible people, can create any kind of criminal and can easily make an assassin. And I'm sure that there have been notorious cases of that in public. I won't mention the names, but you can imagine. And so it isn't just one government that's doing it. It's all the major powers are doing this.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of invisible warfare going on the whole time. We now know, for instance, because it's publicly admitted, but without many details being given, that cyber attacks are taking place every day, massive cyber attacks. But we don't really know who's being attacked or whether, and we never get a report on the damage or what it really means. We might get a few details like 200 million people's data, 600 million people's data, the Pentagon's been hacked, all this kind of thing. But, we don't really know what's going on because we're told that these things are happening, but we're not given any information that's useful to understand how effective it all is. Now, the cyber attacks are part of the invisible war that is continually taking place, that at least we're informed exists. So we're not paranoid by imagining it because we're told, yes, that's true. But there are many other forms of invisible warfare that are going on that if you suggest them, then you're called a crackpot. For instance, weather warfare.
Which circles back to what you said about the insanity of our genocidal nature here on the planet, at least right now. But going back to what you're saying before, too, about the ancient cultures and how they had these other ways of knowing, and they were accessing or aware of these plasma clouds around the Earth long before we discovered it with our scientific research. Do you feel, I mean, from my background in neuropsychology, we're currently becoming, in ancient times, they were more right brain dominant. In the last 5,000 years, we've been more left brain dominant. As we're in a process of change right now and integrating or reintegrating more of those right brain ways of knowing, do you see it as possible that we can develop these ways through our intuition, through going into altered states or mystical states, that we can begin to access the information and intelligence from these plasma clouds in a more direct way?
Definitely. I'm certain of it. And I think that the clouds would like that. They must be benign, because if they didn't like us, we wouldn't still be here. So they must be in favor of our continued existence, and they're probably hoping that we will make it, that the experiment will have a satisfactory result. And I do believe they send inspiration. There are, in my opinion, evil entities, plasma entities of a lesser scale, who are constantly trying to block progress, who are crazy, wicked beings. But we don't know enough about the what could be a universal war between good and evil, and how it would impact here. I've had a number of paranormal experiences myself, and in fact, a lot. And I gather that the bad guys are very much getting the upper hand here on the planet, and that some of the better entities have had to move higher up. I was actually a higher entity visited me in an airplane at 35,000 feet and started speaking to me, and a very unusual plasma being, who said that it was a woman, and she said that she couldn't go down to Earth anymore because of what she called the lizards. She called them the lizards. Now, this did not come from David Icke. This is a plasma being speaking to me at 35,000 feet, said she can't come down because the lizards have taken over the planet. Well, that was her word, not mine. And so I'll make a shocking comment here. What is this about lizards? If you realize that nothing ceases to exist that's alive, and you consider the extinction of the dinosaurs bioplasma beings weren't destroyed, only their physical bodies were. In other words, there may be lots of people walking around who are reincarnations of Tyrannosaurus Rex. Well, that would explain a lot, wouldn't it? because they're ferocious and want to bite and kill and chew and eat everybody. Very
So they're
basic.
operating from that level of mentality.
Yes. In other words, the bioplasma beings of the dinosaurs have probably been human for millions of years, or mammalian, and we don't know how long our human ancestors were, but it seems at least 3 million years ago. But that's nothing in the scale of time. So it may be that because they couldn't cease to exist, because bioplasma entities can't cease to exist, that they're still around, and they're still basically dinosaur mentality, and this could explain the problem. Most of us are not lizards, and aren't that crazy, but the lizards always, they want control, you see, so they rise to the top because they devote all their energies to that, and they don't care who gets hurt. Whereas we're all too sensitive, we're too nice to everybody, and we step aside if somebody else wants to go through the doorway ahead of us, and we give up our seat in the bus to somebody who's more frail or physically handicapped, and we're nice. The lizards aren't.
So this is really fascinating to think about. I mean, you talk about how plasma is this electromagnetic field and how we have those electromagnetic fields in our body, and particularly in the heart and the brain. Do you feel like, and if nothing ever dies, everything is held in this sea of consciousness,
Yes,
in the plasma field, that we can affect the evolution or the consciousness of the planet? Rupert Sheldrake's, understanding of morphogenic fields by our own resonance, and what we then draw to the earth by our own energy field. That if we are caught in violence, we're caught in greed and power over paradigms, then we're actually drawing in maybe more of those energies from the plasma field, the dinosaurs or other entities that carry that resonance, and
yes.
then it creates more of that energy on the earth. But on the other hand, if we are coming more from the heart and moving into a higher level of consciousness, then we are activating that energy on the planet.
I agree completely. Rupert, by the way, is a great friend of mine.
His work is great also.
Yeah, he's a great force for the good. And yes, we're good pals. My wife and I are friends with his whole family. In fact, I knew Olivia, and I knew Rupert and his wife Jill separately before they met each other.
Wow, that's amazing. But if you follow that understanding, then we have a capacity to directly influence what's happening with our evolution here on the planet. And some of my sense from the astrological perspective is we're at a critical choice point here, and that some of the intensification of the violence and the power over and these energies that we're seeing around the globe is the backlash to an increasing shift that we're capable of in terms of moving into a new state of evolution with our human consciousness.
Absolutely.
But it feels like, as you said, there's this larger struggle between good and evil, not just on the planet in terms of our earthly experiment, but across the cosmos, which is extraordinary to think about.
Absolutely. I think I agree with everything you just said. And before I forget to go back to it, I want to answer an much earlier question of yours about the communication across the grid space. In the revised edition of the Sirius Mystery, which came out in 1998, which I expanded by 50%, so you should never read the old one because it's 50% is missing. In the first chapter, I talked about the connection between our sun and the star Sirius, or the Sirius system in the solar system. And at the time, I didn't know all this plasma stuff. And so I can now see what I suggested has a sound physical basis. I suggested that the Sirius system and the solar system were connected in a cell of some kind. I called it the Anubis cell, because Sirius is the dog star and Anubis was the god of the dog god.
That's great.
So I gave it that name, the Anubis cell. But I believed that the two star systems were in a cell together and that the communication between them was somehow possible. Now, I knew this before I'd gone into all this plasma business. I now can see that from the galactic perspective, such a cell would be a dusty, complex, immensely diffuse plasma cell with its own sheath, and that within such a cell, a long-range order takes place, and that you could have instantaneous communication between the star systems because we're in the same cell. And you get the long-range order. And also, another thing I've suggested is that the speed of light restriction would not apply there, or in general with information, because information has no mass and no energy. And so if you look at Einstein's equation, it's E equals mc squared. Well, E on one side, m on the other. It explains how energy and mass transform into one another, and the speed of light, or the velocity of light, to use the more appropriate phrase, squared, is in that picture. But if you're dealing with something that has no energy and has no mass, you don't have the speed of light in there. So information could be, in principle, instantaneously transmitted anywhere in the universe, because the universe itself, although limitless, I'm sure, unbounded, is also a dusty, complex plasma.
Wow, that is extraordinary to think about in terms of the sun and Sirius being a part of this cell. And it would certainly fit with Walter Cruttenden's work on Sirius and the sun being a part of a binary star system.
Oh, does he say that?
Yes.
Well,
so
that
would completely fit with what you're saying.
I didn't know that he'd said that. I'm not that familiar with his work. I know he's a very fine fellow and highly intelligent and all that. I'm not familiar with that at all. But I would agree that you could call them a binary. Not so much binary stars, because they're too far apart to be binary stars per se, binary star systems. So you'd have, it's a higher level of binariness.
Mm-hmm.
I've just invented a word, binariness.
But you're saying then we're in constant communication with Sirius and accessing that intelligence.
Well, you know what the theosophists say. They say it's and Alice Bailey and so forth. They all say that the great white lodge of Sirius is the good guys who are always trying to beam down beneficent rays to the earth and help us. And that may be true. It may be that the star Sirius is where the good guys are in the war between the worlds, or maybe they're the bad guys. We don't know. But I think that the idea. Oh, I think that Cruttenden and I both had this idea separately, but we're in agreement. It's just a matter of detail of how you express it that we might vary, perhaps. That the Sirius star system and the solar system are directly connected, and they form a binary concept, just as the two clouds are a binary concept. Because most of the attention has been given to L5, which I think is the one that was called Metatron. But the thing is, what's the other one up to? Is one the left brain? Is one the right brain? Is one male? Is one female? Are they married? Anything's possible. We don't know. And I do believe that there have been attempts from L5 to communicate with us. That I didn't publish that. Some of that was in my book and it was removed. And but that's another long story, for which
that's fascinating.
I think that you see, all of our concepts of communicating with extraterrestrial life are inadequate. We're looking for little green men out there somewhere. we've got extraterrestrial life between us and the moon. We don't
Mm-hmm.
need to look beyond that. We should be learning about the clouds, and we don't even know about the bottoms of our own oceans. Giant squids and things. Are they there? Are they not there? The fact is that we don't know enough about our own planet, frankly, and we don't know what the core of the Earth is made of. There's all this speculation. We don't know. I've already got a chapter, as you know, called The Cold Sun in my book, in which I point out that our conventional notions of the sun are nonsense. Because if it really had a fusion reaction going on in the center, the sun would get hotter the closer you get to it. But the opposite is true. It gets colder. So the temperature of the photosphere, which is the, quote, surface of the sun, unquote, which is what you see in the photos, with all the swirly bits, it's only about 6,000 degrees. And if you, or 5,000 and 5,500 degrees Celsius, I believe. And if you go down one of the mysterious sunspot holes, and we don't know really what they are, the temperature drops to 3,900 degrees. So it gets colder as you go towards the center. How could you get colder going towards a fusion reaction? There's no hydrogen bomb going off in the center of the sun. That's complete madness. This is an idea that was suggested by the wonderful Sir Arthur Eddington in the 1920s, who did his best because it made sense then.
Mm-hmm.
It no longer does. And people have got to shake that off. It's like saying, I still believe in the Ptolemaic epicycles. You might as well say that as to say that the sun has a hydrogen bomb explosion going off in the center. And they admit themselves that it would take 200,000 years by convection for the results to come up to the surface. And then there's a neutrino problem. There's not enough neutrinos coming out for that explosion. And everybody admits that something's wrong, but they won't admit that they are wrong. See,
but we get so locked into our paradigms and don't want to. And again, that's part of what I so respect about your research. You're an independent researcher trying to discern what's true rather than getting caught up in defending a certain paradigm, which is unfortunately so much of what happens in academia. But before we have to stop, I just want to circle back because I think what you said a few minutes ago is so important, that we've, been speculating about where these other intelligent beings in the universe. And basically what you're saying is they're all around us.
Yes.
They're everywhere.
Yes.
That we're surrounded by intelligence, alive consciousness around the earth and in the cosmos.
Yes, absolutely. And there are life forms of plasma that are invisible to us, and we don't suspect they're there. Some people do. Some people call them angels, but there's it's all happening, and we're blind to most of it. And life is everywhere, and everything is life. The universe is life. It's conscious life. It's a life that feels. It's a life that thinks. It's a life that imagines. And I think that imagining is the source of everything.
Oh, that's so profound, and what a great note to end on. I mean, this is extraordinary, the work that you have done, and thank you so much for being in this conversation and sharing some of this with us. And I highly recommend that people buy your book and as you said, it's worth reading and rereading because there is just so much information in it that really does reframe our understanding of the universe and ourselves.
And there is an audio version, which I recorded also. A lot of people are into audiobooks these days. And it suits them because there are people who prefer them. And so that's why I call attention to that option.
Beautiful. Great. Well, thank you so much.
Well, Heather, it's been terrific talking to you. And I hope we get to meet one day. That
would be wonderful.
Yeah.
That would be wonderful.
Thanks very much for talking to me. I'm greatly honored that you wanted to have this chat.
And thank you to everyone who's been listening.